Please join me by welcoming James Carpenter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to come attend the conference.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to speak a little bit today on two points. One is I'm going to touch on a couple of very early projects which will, I think, frame essentially my approach to working with light, projects that were done about 45 years ago. But basically the subject of the talk this evening is the subject that's really the crux of our studio's work, which is light in the public realm. I mean, we obviously deal with daylight in terms of both its analysis and consulting with experts here in the room on the beneficial uses of daylight within a building, developing systems for daylighting in buildings. But there's also a reciprocal responsibility for buildings relative to the public realm. So a building basically is occupying a public resource. That public resource is daylight. And if you privatize, which you are doing when you build that building, you privatize that public resource, there needs to be some reciprocal responsibility in terms of giving light back to the public. I think from our perspective, that has a lot to do with how the building itself responds to light in multiple conditions, meaning that it is in fact reflecting both image and information. Light is information into the public realm. And it's also a matter of developing surfaces on buildings which have multiple layers to them. Because when we think about light, or when I think about light in particular, I really think about light in nature. I mean, when you see light in nature, you're looking at millions of surfaces that are illuminated over a dense field of vision. And your eye basically consolidates that very, very complex image into an understandable recognition of the space around you. When we begin doing architecture, obviously that whole spatial definition of space is flattened. And in most cases, in terms of contemporary work, a lot of architecture becomes very monolithic and doesn't necessarily have a volume to it. So we work on a principle for daylight on the external side of a building in terms of volumetric light. I mean, where multiple surfaces or a shaping of the skin of the building presents to you very, very rich and sort of engaging images of nature as you look at the building, and it obviously presents all the different changing moments of time. So light in the public realm is the underlying subject here, but I think that I wanted to just touch on some very early projects which literally go back 45 years, some of them. And these are really, I studied architecture originally and then stayed in architecture on and off, but basically got more interested in working in other materials, particularly glass and metals and in film. So I did a lot of film work in the 70s. And these were some very early film or photographs, actually. These are photographs on glass plates. And these have to do with thoughts about transparency, basically. And one thing, and this is one point about light that we tend to ignore, is that we are in fact transparent to light. There are portions of the electromagnetic spectrum that are passing through us at all times. So when we think about light, we always just think about this visual portion of light. But in reality, light is a much broader entity, and it is informing us. It's informing us in ways that I believe we don't even understand. It's informing us in a very unconscious way, as opposed to the actual literal way that our eye constructs information around us. So I think we're absorbing light as a receptacle of this information. And it's something that the work that we try to do to bring about some recognition or acknowledgement of those other aspects of light that we tend to ignore. So these early works, some deal with that aspect, and then another aspect is this quality of light. And this is actually a film done 35, 40 years ago. But a lot of the films done at this time are related to how one constructs space with film. It's not film in the sense of a narrative, where you actually derive a narrative that engages you in sort of a fantasy world that you are drawn into. It's in fact using film to construct a space to have you experience an event in nature. So this is just one of these films which has to do with a Japanese garden. And the reason I chose this film to show you is that if you think of a Japanese garden, it's a very highly constructed environment. It's basically a synthetic nature. You're actually drawn into this environment, highly controlled in terms of the scale of the plants or the scale of the specimens in the garden, your experience of that space. It can either be a sort of a compressive environment or a slightly expansive environment, but it's all controlled. It's a controlled environment, and you may want to use that as an analogy to our own sort of urban environments. But the one element or the one free radical or the one free agent within those gardens are actually koi, these fish. And this is a film sequence of these fish. And what these fish serve the purpose of within a Japanese garden is a release from that particular space. So when you're looking across that sheet of water in the Japanese garden with the light reflecting on it, the one element that's not controlled is this movement of a fish that's been bred for thousands of years, white, black, and orange, basically. They use shadow, light, and color to sort of make themselves apparent or present in the landscape. So when you actually observe this moving fragment of light in the landscape, it's basically a psychological release. It's a spiritual release from that environment or from that controlled space. So it's using light. It's using actually a creature that captures light and presents light in a very unusual way, but its main purpose is this idea of release or sort of acknowledgement of a world beyond the world you're in. So this sort of underlies a lot of the work in our studio, like how to think about light. How is it that it's sort of a shared collective experience that we all have? How do you sort of bring that about in a built environment? So what I put in today actually were a couple of projects, coincidentally, that are fairly close to us here today. This is a project done about 20 years ago, a competition that we were part of for the new German Foreign Ministry building. It's about a 5-minute walk from here, actually. And it's on the Spray River, done with a German firm, a young German firm. And our responsibility was to do the public space, basically the space you enter into for all the news conferences and things that happen at the Foreign Ministry. But it's the exterior curtain wall as well as the roof of this space. And what you're looking at is an atrium space that looks due north. So we all speak about this latitude that we are at today in Berlin. And obviously in the winter, you have very, very low angles of light. And in fact, the north-facing wall that you see at the back of the atrium, in fact, actually gets no light at any time of the year. So the whole design of this wall, which you'll see faces a garden opposite it, and it also faces a beautiful shingle church. You probably can't recognize the church in this reflected image, but you can see some of the trees from across the street. So it works with multiple levels of reflectivity and sort of depth in terms of construction of the wall. So that actually takes nature into the building when you observe it from the exterior, and vice versa. When you're inside the building, there's a slightly reflective boundary framing that center of the wall, and then some early studies of the wall section on the left, and then how it behaves in terms of daylighting. So the main structure on the roof are actually daylighting reflectors built into the structure. So the north sun coming, or the sun coming from the south, hitting that south-facing part of the structure, then bounces light back into the building, back on that surface. And then we used a coating, a glass coating, on the interior surface of the exterior wall. And what that does is the light coming from the south hits the inside surface of the north wall and bounces the light back into the space. So you're using coatings of glass. It's very transparent. It's a cable structure done with architects, engineers that we work with actually all the time here in Berlin and Stuttgart. Very lightweight wall, but a wall that tempers this space. It's not a controlled space in terms of heating. And a couple comments that Christoph made and some others have made. How do we make exterior environments much more, how can you populate these environments in wintertime, make them comfortable to be in even though they're not heated? And that's very much what happens here. You can go in and out of the building. It's a very commonly used space during the winter months, gives this very beautiful view of the Veresmarktkirche across the street. So a project here that I thought might be of interest. You can see again this idea of volumetric light. There's actually a separate layer of glass floating in front of the actual weather wall. So it builds up these multiple images where that piece of glass is on the inside of the building, but you also have the reflected image of it that it makes it appear like it's outside the building. So you're taking a clear boundary condition and actually having it feel like it has much more depth or volume to it. If some of you have time here, it's actually quite an interesting wall. And then a separate project in Bonn, which was done for the Deutsche Post with Helmut Jahn. And it's on the Rhine River in Bonn, where the government had been obviously previously to moving to Berlin. And this is an opportunity to build an observation platform within the building that the occupants of the building have their cafeteria nearby, and this little viewing tower is part of the building, but it's right over the river and lets you look down at the river from within it. And something we work with a lot in our projects, and what is seen, I guess, here on this interior view looking down in a model, is the whole interior surface of this shape that you occupy has these very simple sky blue rectangles printed on the inside surface of the glass. And exactly on the outside of that blue rectangle is a mirrored rectangle. So from the outside, you look at this tower. The mirrors basically reflect the image of the sky and nature behind you, so you have a fragmentation of nature imprinted on the skin of the building. Then simultaneously you look through the glass and you see the blue rectangles beyond it. So it almost feels as if the sky has jumped from the outer surface to the innermost surface within the structure. And people then gather on the different levels. It's about 3 levels high, and then you look out over the river. But it creates this pattern that in Maryland's sort of studies, this whole idea of a complexity of light, daylight, in this case both blue light, reflected light with imaging of nature, and direct light simultaneously sort of embody this space with a very lively and sort of active environment. So I think in a way this is starting with some of those early slides of photography and cinematic work. We think of light, as I said, as information, that it's really it's information. It's not just light. It's not brightness. It's information. I mean, the light is bringing a wealth of information to your eye, and you also have to recall that that same information that your eye is deciphering and interpreting is going past you. So basically, your images, I mean, my eye is constructing them, but similarly, your images are basically wrapping this room at the same time. The same reflected image that I'm interpreting from you with my eye is in fact embedding all these surfaces. So there's a cinematic quality to light, and it's that embedment of information that I think is very, very interesting and challenging to think about when you're working with daylight. So these projects are, they're very, very different types of things. So this is a more recent project. This is a new federal courthouse building in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's a little bit unusual for a building, and perhaps I shouldn't have included it here because it's, as a federal building, they certainly are the source and magnet for urban environments to gather around. I mean, historically, courthouses or city halls or whatever public social service, a city would normally gravitate around it. And what's happened for us, basically, in the United States is that security issues have made these buildings almost like isolated icons. You cannot have other structures near them. You can't approach them easily. They've actually made a boundary condition around these buildings that makes them stand apart from other buildings. So they're almost anti-urban in a way. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity to do something that can be very iconic and very sort of signatory. And in Salt Lake City, where there's very, very intense daylight, this building is essentially all glass. It's an entirely glass building. And in order to work with energy codes, as we obviously have to do on all these buildings, and security, and all these other overlaying performative aspects that these projects need to have, we're trying to balance multiple methodologies to achieve those results. So you have an outboard shading device system that's unique to each elevation, which I'll show you in some detail. you have an all-glass surface that has a relatively high-performance coating on it, and then you have selected areas where there's fritting, meaning ceramic fritting or interlayers in the glass itself. So you have three different ways of dealing with the energy issues coming into the building. It's a courthouse that has 20 courtrooms, 24 federal courtrooms, which are roughly about this size. They're all daylit. Every room in the building is completely daylit. All the circulation is daylit. And we've just sort of noted, you can see some of the some areas that read slightly differently, and that's by altering the shading device at the public circulation areas and slightly changing the fritting on the building. So just walking through this project, which went through a long, long process. This building began in 1995, actually, and went through two complete designs prior to this because the court kept consolidating itself, meaning that they were shutting down smaller courthouses and trying to accumulate them in one area. Eventually it grew to the scale of this building, and this was the final design. But we started with this idea early on that in this relatively intense environment, every elevation would have a specific shading device for it. And you can sort of see how the earlier versions were working. They're sort of folded stainless steel, perforated either on the side wall or on the face, depending on the elevation, in certain depth to have cut-off angles. A little diagram of how they all worked. Some are wider, some are narrower, depending on the elevation. Ultimately, they ended up being fairly heavy extrusions and also perforated and milled out. So you see a mock-up of that sort of going up. And then you sort of see in this image something that's quite interesting is that they're very angle sensitive, meaning that they're all designed for maximum shading from that particular sun angle, but from the opposite direction, looking at the building, they're totally transparent. So if you're at the north side looking at this building, it looks like an all-glass building. You look right into the whole building, but as you come around, it's hidden away. And then I will take you, as I just have my little key that I have a few more minutes here because we don't want to overrun on time. I'll just take you into this project, which is actually under construction, and we're just responsible for the lower rectangle that you see down below there. Other towers are going up by Cone Pedersen Fox in this instance, but we were asked to provide a very large curtain wall that houses the public spaces of the building. It sort of runs along the base of the building. It's quite a significant structure. But it went back to picking up on some of this work that we had done on the building in Bonn, where you start playing with these different field effects of imaging in the surface of the glass. And in the wall design that we began to develop, it's about 40 meters high, and it's about 140 meters long. But it's one layer of glass, vertical, and a slightly tilted layer of glass that comes down on the outside. So here's a diagram of that and how we would work with the different effects of the wall. You're just looking at the layering of the wall system up against the building. We work in models. I have to agree with many of the people that spoke today. We obviously do design and detailed work, but we do a lot of analysis work and physical models. And you sort of see how this wall becomes sort of a shaded exposure. It becomes more transparent as it goes vertically. And then the structure of the wall are these cylinders, basically, that come off the base building and project out and support the angled surface of glass in front of it. And they're all controlled by computer, and we can sort of control the lighting level of all that structure that supports the glass, and you then in turn see the reflected image of that glass within the wall. So anyway, this idea of coming back to the notion of light in the public realm, this is really a way to engage people. Let me go back to that image of this previous wall. It's a way to engage people with an activation of light and an activation of space. This is actually something you walk underneath and you walk past it. So you're actually experiencing those types of movements as you go by the wall. And it's a way of sort of capturing that reflected image of the sky while still allowing views into the space. So I think I'll leave my talk right there. Okay? Great. Thanks. Thank you very much.